Let me just wait for a couple more people to come. Let me see how it looks so we know we're doing it correctly. Just wait a couple minutes for people to come in. How is everyone doing? I'm just gonna wait like 2 or 3 more, maybe like a minute more. Let me share this to my own page. Okay, I think I'm gonna slowly get started. Welcome everyone. This is very exciting for me. I am opening the literary music series. It's a series that I started, and the premise behind it is the intertwining of music with other art forms, which is something that I've always been very passionate about, and something that until now I didn't realize how many people were passionate about. So today will be an exploration of 2 things that I love very deeply: piano repertoire, specifically Brahms, and poetry. 2 poems by me and 2 poems by great geniuses, Robert Frost and Dylan Thomas. We are going to start the program. It is Brahms 4 Klavierstücke, Opus 119, which is Brahms' last piano piece. And each piece in the set, there's 4 pieces in the set, will be accompanied by a poem. So I'm really excited to embark on this journey with you. Let's get started. This is the first intermezzo in B minor, and the first poem is by me. Me alone, like the shadowed being inside my dream, unsoiled pavement and a mosaic of stars. I look up above to what I'll never know, knowing only this: slicing slivers of night from the fingers of God, sheltering it from the feeding fear fairies of tomorrow. I will move softly into this big life. So the reason that I chose this specific poem to match this first intermezzo is this piece specifically was Brahms's last piano piece. He died a few years later, and I always think of this first intermezzo as the beginning of the end. And the way that I personally view the poem that I wrote is from the eyes of someone who has already climbed and went down a mountain of real struggle and hardship in life. Someone who has reached the bottom and is ready to move on, but this time not in haste, not in a rush, not with anxiety, but with softness. In this poem is someone who's in the sunset of their life, someone who has closed many chapters and is ready to open the final chapter and is ready to move into it this time with love, with kindness, with ease, and with an acceptance that, like the stars in the poem, the mosaic of stars above that are unknown, that are mysterious, that have an effervescent quality, that are untouchable and always bring surprise. They are moving into their life, knowing that they will encounter more surprises, more unknowns, but this time they're ready for them and they're ready to embrace them. And that's how I feel it connects to this piece as well, because this piece is not only just the beginning of the end, but it has so many harmonic surprises as well. It has such fascinating and really different from what was going on at the time language that Brahms is using. He's looking forward almost to the 20th century with this music for some of the harmonies that he uses. And of course, when you blend them like he does, it creates this beautiful aura. It creates this depth, something you can sink into. But if you hear the notes individually, they are like these mosaic of stars that are, up above, and they look different every night. So this is the reason why I connected this poem to this piece. It's the sunset of someone's life and beginning of the end, and they're moving into it kindly. And as this is Brahms's very last piano piece, he's moving into this large and intimidating journey. As you will see when I continue this piece, he's moving into it with softness. That's how the intermezzo had a certain sense of softness. Of course, it erupted at times, but it always came back to this valley of calm. And like the person in the poem, this intermezzo is also the beginning of the end. And now I will move on to the next poem and the next intermezzo. The next poem is also by me. Frost and Thomas are reserved for the last two. I will read it as I did the first poem, and then play, and then discuss again. Attached forever, they wrap around me like the arms of a willow, tender, weightless, invisible mostly. Some days I forget they exist, and then today, when the wind blew me north as it did before, in the fog with them, and the pavement was just as it looked, that evening last year when we treaded the snow and time promised us she'd slow a moment. I feel them, and I place my hands over theirs and whisper, as I do sometimes, I'll always see you. So the reason I chose this particular poem is because it talks all about memory. And I always see memory as something that's very twofold. There is the visualization that you have of a memory, almost like a silent film that passes through your imagination when you will it to. And then there's the feeling that you have from a memory, which is something that pops up inside of you almost involuntarily. Of course, you can will it as well, but think about your most cherished memories in life. Of course, you can imagine them. You can see them in your mind's eye, but as time goes on, it might be a little bit more difficult to remember, exactly what you were wearing, exactly what music was being played, what was said. But what you'll never forget is how it felt. And in the poem, I mix the two together. I talk about the arms of a willow that wrap around you. That's a metaphor, but it's almost as if the feeling of the memory is always wrapping itself around you, and you always see it. Versus, talking about how, you were in the fog with your friends, the pavement was just as it looked. These are images, and the images come and go, but the feeling that the images elicit is something that will always stay with you. And the way that I feel it connects to this particular intermezzo is the intermezzo itself is also broken up in a twofold way. You have the opening, which is, of course, and I see that as something that you can almost touch, something that you can almost see, but it always slips out of your hand at the very last moment, and it's mostly just something that you can feel. And the middle section, which is wholly different from the opening, that section, this is the fleeting image of the memory, because you hear that part once. It's very beautiful, it's very moving, and then it's gone. And here in this piece, it doesn't come back, but it has that same characteristic of a fleeting, effervescent image that passes through your mind's eye. And the beginning, the feeling, the intangible entity, the entity that always stays with you much more than an image does, is this, which comes back after we're done with the middle section, after we're done with the image. It comes back, it returns, and that is so parallel to what I see memories as. Something that is a very strong feeling that stays with you eternally, and images that come and go in a very fleeting manner. There was a Maya Angelou quote that I wanted to share that is kind of related. It goes something along the lines of, I've learned that people will forget what you've said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's very true, I have memories that I hold very close, and I don't remember what someone said to me in the memories particularly, but I do remember how that made me feel, and I can conjure up that feeling quite easily. So next is the third intermezzo, and finally you get the real geniuses like Robert Frost and Dylan Thomas. For this one, I will be reading a very famous poem by Robert Frost entitled Birches. This is one of my personal favorite poems of all time. It's a little long, but it's worth it if you've never heard it before. And if you have, you know what I'm talking about. And then I will play the intermezzo, and then we will talk again. Sorry. When I see birches bend to left and right across the lines of straighter, darker trees, I'd like to think some boy's been swinging them. But swinging doesn't bend them down to stay as ice storms do. Often you must have seen them loaded with ice a sunny winter morning after a rain. They click upon themselves as the breeze rises and turn many-colored as the stir cracks and crazes their enamel. Soon the sun's warmth makes them shed crystal shells, shattering and avalanching on the snow crust. Such heaps of broken glass to sweep away, you'd think the inner dome of heaven had fallen. They are dragged to the withered bracken by the load, and they seem not to break, though once they are bowed so low for long, they never right themselves. You may see their trunks arching in the woods years afterwards, trailing their leaves on the ground like girls on hands and knees that throw their hair before them over their heads to dry in the sun. But I was going to say, when truth broke in with all her matter of fact about the ice storm, I should prefer to have some boy bend them as he went out and in to fetch the cows. Some boy too far from town to learn baseball, whose only play was what he found himself, summer or winter, and could play alone. One by one he subdued his father's trees by riding them down over and over again, until he took the stiffness out of them, and not one but hung limp, not one was left for him to conquer. He learned all there was to learn about not launching out too soon, and so not carrying the tree away clear to the ground. He always kept his poise to the top branches, climbing carefully, with the same pains you use to fill a cup up to the brim and even above the brim. Then he flung outward, feet first with a swish, kicking his way down through the air to the ground. So was I once myself a swinger of birches, and so I dream of going back to be. It's when I'm weary of considerations, and life is too much like a pathless wood, where your face burns and tickles with the cobwebs broken across it, and one eye is weeping from a twig's having lashed across it open. I'd like to get away from earth a while, and then come back to it and begin over. May no fate willfully misunderstand me and half grant what I wish, and snatch me away not to return. Earth's the right place for love. I don't know where it's likely to go better. I'd like to go by climbing a birch tree, and climb black branches up a snow-white trunk toward heaven, till the tree could bear no more, but dipped its top and set me down again. That would be good, both going and coming back. One could do worse than be a swinger of birches. So the reason I chose this specific poem to go with this piece is there is this sense of swing and lilt that exists both in the music and in the poetry. And I really believe that although this was written not directly at the end of his life, but approaching the end of his life, Dylan Thomas. Brahms too, but also Robert Frost. Robert Frost, and Brahms. These were both written at later parts in their life. He was not young when he wrote this, Robert Frost. We here feel a great sense of escape. We know that the end is near, but we want to swing away from it. We want to fly away from reality. We want to touch the untouchable entities like love and, heaven, and reach the peak of our imagination. But inevitably, as it goes in life, and as it goes with the birch tree, and as it goes in the rhythm of this piece, we always fall back down to reality. We always hit the bottom again. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. There is this continual sense of push and pull. When we reach the end of anything, life, a great event that we were at, memory, we want to hold on to it a little bit longer. We want to climb a little bit further so we can keep it for a while. But that doesn't always last, and that lilt, that inevitable lilt that exists in the poem, in this piece, and inevitably in life, is very powerful. This really deeply felt swing between truth and between what we aspire in our imagination. We have great fantasies that take us to these beautiful places, but we always have to come back from them. And the fact that this was written towards the end of Brahms's life, and Frost lived a longer life, but he did write this in his 40s. I know that's young, but he wasn't 20 when he wrote this. He lived a significant amount of life already. It seems as though he wrote this, and perhaps Brahms too, in my personal opinion, with this sensation of truly wanting and regretting not doing this earlier, wanting to just relish in the simple beauties of life and appreciate the smaller things. And that is another sense that I get from this poem and this music, is that as we approach the end, we really do want to cherish the things that we might not have cherished as much before. So I feel like these two pieces of art have that in common. And now I will move on to the very last one in our program. This one is the Rhapsody, which closes the Brahms. And the poem that I will be reciting is Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight, and learned too late, they grieve it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. So, that was the very last piece of music that was written for piano, solo piano by Brahms. And it really is so wonderful that Brahms puts this particular rhapsody as the closing of this piece, because he could have chosen this to be the closing, an accepting of the end. And it ends in the B minor. Like that could have been the end of this entire intermezzo, but no. And that's why I think this poem by Dylan Thomas truly fits this rhapsody, because the end is near, the end is coming, but we don't want the end to come. We do not go gentle into the good night. Brahms opens with this triumphant, glorious, booming sound. As a farewell. And he closes with this fighting spirit. He closes with this dramatic, ferocious, almost like passionate anger, because he doesn't want it to end. And Dylan Thomas writes this as a son pleading to his father in the last moments of his life. If you have to die, don't die quietly. Do not go gentle into the good night. Rage against the dying of the light. And he rages. Brahms rages against the dying of the light. He goes into E flat minor, which is the parallel minor of E flat major. That's how it starts. That's how it ends. Same E flat, but now in minor key. I mean, he could have very easily, done something like but that is too accepting of the fact that this is the end. He doesn't do that. He fights against the end. And it's so glorious, in my opinion, that he does that, because it is so fitting to this poem. He rages against the dying of the light. And to think that the last 3 notes that Brahms ever wrote for solo piano was that is just so defiant and so powerful. It just holds a lot of potency and holds a lot of parallel to this same poem by Dylan Thomas. And the piece itself, the Rhapsody, it's truly a piece in itself. It's very kaleidoscopic. It has moments of tenderness, as you heard. It has moments of silliness. It has, obviously, moments of triumph. And then it has moments of despair. And it has moments of fight. And Brahms certainly doesn't go gentle. Brahms approaches the end in a rage. He rages against the dying of the light. He died 3 years after this. He still wrote music, but not for solo piano. And it is so wonderful and powerful to me that that is how he chooses to say farewell to the instrument. with this. So if anyone has any questions, that's the conclusion of the program. It was pretty much exactly 45 minutes. If anyone has any questions, otherwise I will just sign off and say thank you for listening to me. Okay. Maybe someone said something. Nice. Okay, well, I will sign off, and thank you for tuning into the literary music series. And next week, we will have poetry by professor and poet and author Joseph Fasano, accompanied by more Brahms. And I didn't plan this, but next week I will be playing one of the first pieces Brahms wrote for solo piano, the first of his 4 ballades, opus 10. This is opus 119. And then Schumann's Traumerei from Kinderschienen. And so different from the Resignation of one. Yeah, it is. It's very different. That's a good point. That's Noah, and he will be playing in June. So look out for him. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I will be back again at this time next week, but I won't be alone. And we will be talking about childhood, and we'll be reading more poems, and we'll be playing more music. And thank you so much for being with me tonight, and this will continue on weekly, so stay tuned. Okay, bye.